Welcome to the third installment of Peninsula Symphony All-Stars at Home. And today we are welcoming two wonderful guests from Los Angeles, virtuoso violinist Niv Ashkenazi. Welcome, Niv.
Hi, thank you.
And from Istanbul, on the other end of the world, one of the founders of the Violins of Hope, Avshalom Weinstein. Welcome, Avshi.
Thank you, Mitch.
So it's nice to have you both here and talking about the Violins of Hope. The Peninsula Symphony's program featuring the Violins of Hope, we were going to have a whole violin section and the one viola and the one cello performing all kinds of music that we were very much looking forward to last March. Got postponed for obvious reasons as the coronavirus hit. And we are looking forward to recreating that event next spring, the spring of 2021. But in the meantime, we still haven't had a chance to have the Peninsula Symphony present music played on the Violins of Hope. And so we're thrilled to have Niv here. And so we'd like to hear a piece of music played on one of the Violins of Hope. These are the violins that were owned by the people who were in the concentration camps, almost all of whom didn't survive, but the instruments did. They were lovingly restored by Amnon and Avshi Weinstein. And so Niv has one of those violins, and he's going to play for us a Klezmer classic, Freilich from Bukovina. Anything you want to say about this piece, Niv, before you play?
Yeah, I was really excited to find it, and the thanks to that honestly goes to Janice from Mostly Kosher. It's a klezmer band out here, and I talked with her, and she recommended this one, and it's such a beautiful piece. They're sort of Freilochs are happy pieces, so even though it's in a minor key, it's a happy dance for the most part.
Let's hear Freilich from Bukovina, played by Niv Ashkenazi. Thank you, Neve. That was beautiful. Thank you very much. We loved that. So this is obviously a classic klezmer tune that would have been played in the shtetl,
Hmm.
possibly all over Europe. Do you know exactly where its origins are? Are they in Poland?
It is Eastern European, just as there were a lot of border changes. So I think there was,
Right.
I think they were talking like sort of Romania area, I think, from what my research showed. But it all kind of switched around, and it would have been not just centered there, of course. So yes, all over.
And of course, these instruments range from those that were probably mostly played in the folk tradition of klezmer music in the Jewish communities, but also played for classical music. Avshi, what is the whole range of violins of hope and their origins? While you have it right there, Neve, show us the back of your violin and
So
how. Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Avshi.
So the violin that Niv has, it's a violin which was made in the border between the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, and Germany. And the place they made tons of instruments, mostly very low level, some with ornaments like the one you see here with Stars of David, some with different ornaments like crosses and whatever ornaments they would think of. And some instruments had no ornaments, but these are very low grade, very simple instruments, extremely fastly made, and they were very, very cheap. And the Klezmers, who were the vast majority of them, like most of the vast majority of the Eastern European Jewish people, they were very poor people. They couldn't buy the good stuff because they simply didn't have the money. And this is what they could buy. Now, they paid maybe a bit more because the violin had a Star of David ornament, but in the end, this is the kind of instruments which would be very common to find in Eastern Europe if you can go back in time to these areas and see what those people had.
Yeah. When did this instrument come to your atelier, your workshop? Do you recall?
Between 5 to 10 years ago, probably, maybe even more. I I can't really recall.
Yeah. Later on in the program, we'll talk a little bit about the different origins of these instruments, how they came to your workshop, and what you and your father have done to restore them. But I do want to point out that the Jewish tradition of violin playing and string playing, but especially violin, is not limited by any means to klezmer. And in fact, the greatest violinists, almost all of the greatest violinists in Europe in the first half of the 20th century were Jews who were trained in the Russian style. We'll move on to another piece of music here. Neva is going to play for us the presto from the first sonata of Bach, unaccompanied in G minor. And we want to illustrate that these instruments are, especially as they've been lovingly restored and brought back to life by Amnon and Avshi, are capable of playing any violin music very beautifully, going back to the Bach unaccompanied pieces written 300 years ago, long before these instruments were made. So Neve is going to play for us the presto from the first sonata of Bach. Anything you want to say about this before you play it, Neve?
Yeah, so with this piece, Bach was one of the major German composers, and of course, in 1933, with the mandate, this would have been one of the pieces and one of the composers that Jews were no longer allowed to play. Basically, only Germans were going to be allowed to play the great German composers. So this is one of those pieces that during that time would not have been heard on an instrument like this or other ones from the collection.
So here is Niv Ashkenazi, the presto movement of Bach's first sonata in G minor. Beautiful. Thank you, Niv. That was just gorgeous. Absolutely wonderful. Avshi, how did this whole project get started with you, with your father, Amnon Weinstein? What was the origin of this whole Violins of Hope project?
Well, we all knew that there were people playing instruments and there was music in the Holocaust. I mean, this is not it's not a revelation. All the camps had orchestras. They were kind of competing in a way. The commandant, whose orchestra is going to be better, who's going to play what and whatever. But we never had actual instruments of people who actually played. And the whole thing actually started from a very different perspective. In Israel in the 30s, they formed an orchestra, which later on became the Israeli Philharmonic. And the guy who formed it was Bronislaw Huberman. And he did it because when he saw what's going on in Germany in 1933 and just before, he realized that very soon there will be war in Germany, in Europe, and he wanted to try as many musicians and people that he could. So he formed an orchestra in Israel, brought the best musicians from all over Europe to Israel, formed the orchestra, and brought also their families alongside. Now we have some of the very first programs from the Philharmonic, and you can see it says, okay, the name of the guy, what he's playing, and what was his former job in Europe. So it's leader of this, leader of that, second violin of this. I mean, these are the best musicians in Europe. Now, many of them had very good German-made instruments because the German makers were really excellent craftsmanship. But after the war, nobody wanted in Israel to touch anything German, nothing. You couldn't buy German goods. It was very simple. There was no German. They wouldn't even say the word Germany in the radio. And many of these musicians, they came to my grandfather and they told him, they said, either you're going to buy this instrument for me or I'm going to destroy it. Because don't forget one thing. All the people who came from Europe, all of them probably with no exceptions, lost family. If it's brothers and sisters and parents and whatever, they lost family sometimes by the hundreds. And they didn't want to touch it anymore. They sold it to my grandfather. My grandfather bought whatever he could. He knew that there is no way that he can sell it because nobody wants to touch anything German. And it stayed as a collection for many, many years. Until in 1991, my father had an apprentice coming from Dresden. Now, Dresden was Eastern Europe until 1989. It was a Soviet country. And in Soviet Union, they would not teach about Jewish Holocaust. And when Daniel Schmidt, the bow maker, when he came to Israel, and he's coming from a family who is in the business of violin and bow making for about 250 years. And he met survivors, he heard about the Holocaust, and he saw this excellent collection of fantastic German-made instruments that my father had from my grandfather. And he asked my father, he said, how can you get some of these instruments here? And my father told him the whole story. And it took him a few years to convince my father to give a lecture in Germany to the German Violin and Bow Making Association about those German-made instruments and how they came to Israel. And after that, my father went on a radio show and he asked people if they have any stories or maybe by chance even an instrument whose owner survived or didn't survive from the Holocaust. Now, this is a very interesting radio show. I think they stopped now, but I'm not so sure. This was like the Facebook after the pre-war Facebook. People would go on air saying, I'm this and that, I'm coming from here and there, I'm looking for my mother, my father, my sister, whatever, and leave the phone number, and people will call them and tell them, listen, you know, I saw him here, I saw him there, I heard like this, I heard like this. Is how people learned what happened to their families. And of course, in 1999, it wasn't the case, but still people talked about their families. And the day after, we got a phone call from a guy that his uncle was killed in the Holocaust, and he had a violin made by one of the Jewish violin makers who worked in Vilna, in Warsaw, in Poland. And the violin has a Star of David inlaid on its back, and he has a label in Hebrew. And unfortunately, his uncle did not survive, as well as the violin maker, but this was one of 3 or 4 Jewish violin makers who worked before the war. We know about, as you said, about many, many thousands of musicians, but we only had about 3 or 4 Jewish violin makers who actually worked. And this was the first instrument, and later on we got more and more instruments.
How many violins are there altogether now?
I think about 88, but I might be mistaken.
And with the Peninsula Symphony, we were going to be playing on 25 or 30 of those violins and the 1 viola and the 1 cello that are in the collection.
Yep.
How did those instruments, the viola and the cello, enter the collection?
These were also sold to my grandfather. These were German instruments, were brought by musicians from what was then Palestine Orchestra and today the Israeli Philharmonic. Unfortunately, we don't know to whom they belonged because my grandfather, in order to not pay taxes to the British, didn't keep his books during this time. So we don't really know from whom exactly he bought it. We know where the general origin is from, but not the actual people.
Right.
Only one violin, we know the actual person that he bought from.
And we can assume that almost all of the musicians who played these violins perished in the Holocaust. The instruments that survived, these instruments
some and some. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I cannot give you from top of my head how many people died and how many survived.
Yeah.
But musicians, because the Nazis needed them, because they in a way worked a bit less than the others and got a bit better conditions, some of them survived. Many of them did not want to touch any musical instrument anymore in their life, but many survived.
And of course, these instruments are made of wood. They are living things. They have been brought to life in the hands of violinists and other string players through the 20th century up until the Holocaust, and then brought back to life by Amnon and Avshi and their atelier. And these instruments, all of the great string instruments, we're still playing on instruments that are 250 years old, the golden period instruments.
Even close to 500, some of them.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. These living things, these instruments, survive us all. And so to have brought these sometimes magnificent, sometimes ordinary, but always precious Holocaust instruments back to life and allowing them to regain the life of living music is just such a great tribute to you and to the people who played them for generations before the Holocaust. So we're all very, very grateful. Niv, how did you first get involved? Now, one of the ways that you're involved is that you've released a recording, Niv Ashkenazi, Violins of Hope, and that has certainly been a major project. But how did you first get involved with the Violins of Hope?
I first got involved in 2017 when Violins of Hope was in Sarasota. And through the Perlman Music Program, who was in charge of bringing the musicians, and they brought alumni from their program, I was one of the people invited. And actually, so was the pianist Matthew Graybill, who I did the album with. So that's actually when we first collaborated, and we've since really enjoyed collaborating together. And that's when I got in touch. That's when I met Avshi, reconnected with Amnon, and that's actually when we asked whether we could borrow an instrument for one of the instruments from the collection for a different program that was also Holocaust related and educational. So to our surprise, Avshi said yes. So I ended up flying to Israel over Passover in April and picking up this instrument after trying a few of them. And before I was able to return it, there were more events that Avshi asked me to do where they couldn't bring the full collection or even a big significant part of the collection like they would for Peninsula Symphony, and where they could only bring one instrument. So, yeah.
That's terrific. Yeah, in fact, we had all of the instruments that we were going to use for the Peninsula Symphony concert here in the San Mateo area on the San Francisco Peninsula, and they were all set to be played, and the coronavirus shut us down, and the next place they were going to go was Los Angeles for a whole series of concerts there that would have involved me and lots of other LA people. All of these projects will happen. We wish we knew exactly when, but they will. We're going to move on to another piece of music that involves Niv, but it's pre-recorded, and you'll see in a moment why it's pre-recorded. This is music of Mieczysław Weinberg, not Weinstein, but Weinberg, Polish-Russian composer, whose music is getting quite a lot more attention. He died, 20 years ago or so. Survived the war, lived most of his life in Russia, was considered one of the greatest of the Russian composers, and somehow his music didn't stay in the repertoire as much as Prokofiev and Shostakovich, but a lot of people think that it is of equal value. Tell us about the sonata for two violins that we're going to see pre-recorded, Niv.
Yeah, so this sonata, I was looking for something actually while the instruments were in San Francisco, a piece that would be for two violins, because I was working with a wonderful violinist from your area. And this was honestly the only piece that we could find. I'm sure there's more out there, and a lot more pieces are being discovered. But Weinberg was actually, like you were saying, one of those people that was at least somewhat recognized and is getting more recognition now. He was actually good friends with Shostakovich, and Shostakovich helped him along to get to different places in his career. So it's very similar in style of writing, and it's a wonderful piece. So this is the middle movement. It's the second movement of his sonata for two violins.
And we'll now listen to that pre-recorded. Here we go with Mieczyslaw Weinberg's sonata for two violins, the middle movement. Niamh, how did you record that? The second violinist looks remarkably like you and plays almost as well as you do. How was that recorded?
So with the coronavirus, there's been a lot of videos similar to this where people have to play with themselves because we don't have other people to play with. So this was recorded separately in each part, having to play to myself, basically recording one part, then the other, combining it and putting video to it. So it's an exciting project to do and a lot of work, but very rewarding to actually do that kind of music. And it's a very different way of approaching music.
So you recorded the first part. There wasn't a click track or anything like that.
No.
You just recorded the first part, video, and recorded it, and then set yourself up and played the second part with the first part in your headphones.
For the most part, yes. A lot of the time there's even more complications than that, but yes, that's the general idea. Yeah. Usually from a musician's perspective, you want to get the rhythm section down. So anything rhythmic down, you can either do it rhythm to melody or melody to rhythm, and it kind of depends what's best in each situation. Yeah.
And did you do the engineering on this, or did you have
And I did everything.
That's a learning curve on the software for matching the engineering details.
Yeah. I mean, the audio stuff I've been doing for a while for myself. The video is a newer skill in terms of fitting it all together in that way. But the programs are amazing out there, and it's nice to actually get to learn them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the
Use
Peninsula
your
Symphony.
free time.
Yes, use my free time.
When you don't have kids, you have lots of free time. Trust me, later on.
Avshi has 2 kids, and we got to meet them in California before all of this fell apart. Is your Avshi, is your workshop busy or sort of on hold at this point?
Let's say that in the last 6 months, I probably worked maybe 10 days, not even full.
Yeah, well, all of us are in a prolonged hiatus. All of our concerts have been canceled. Many of us are doing a lot of virtual performing, virtual programs, just like the one we're doing right now. But it isn't the same as playing together. And that's why it was nice to see Niamh playing together with himself. And we hear ensemble music that was created in this era. And there's a lot of that on the Peninsula Symphony website as well, and more to come. Avshi, tell us a little bit more about some of the individual stories of the instruments.
So we have lots of a huge variety of stories. Some of them, of course, we know a bit more in detail. Some of them actually wrote books or have books written on them. We have an instrument which was played in the Auschwitz Orchestra, for example. We have instruments which were played in other camps by people who survived or managed to escape. We have a violin which belonged to a Polish prisoner of war, Jewish, who basically was a prisoner of war from the 3rd week of the war until the end. And his Polish friends in his unit bought him this violin, and this is the instrument that he played on. We have so many different stories. I mean, it's amazing, and there are all the time more and more stories coming. For example, one of the last instruments that we got belonged to an American soldier, a German guy who immigrated at the age of 16 to United States in 1938, and later on joined the US Army in the war. And I got from his daughter. He has a beautiful photo album from day one in basic training until the end of the war, going through Europe. And he even managed to find his grandparents' grave, which was the gravestone, which was broken in Germany. We have a very interesting story, a violin that we got from a very good friend of my father, a violin maker. I don't know how many of you know, but China was basically the only place Jews could run away to.
Right.
And there was a huge ghetto there, and there was a big amount of musicians there. And these were the first people who brought Western classical music into China and actually taught Western classical music in China. And we all know how many Chinese are playing today Western classical music. And this all started most probably by those people. Yeah. And this is the violin which was used by one of them. And the amount of stories is increasing, and I'm sure that we only have a very small fracture. As I said, we have about 88 instruments, but if every camp had an orchestra, just imagine how many tens of thousands of instruments were there.
That's right. What was the first large-scale performance project once you had enough instruments to create that?
The very first concert was in Istanbul, in Turkey. The second concert was in Paris. And then we did the one in Israel in 2008. And after that, it was Charlotte and Cleveland, and I honestly don't remember all of them.
The Cleveland concert with the Cleveland Orchestra, one of my favorite orchestras, and an orchestra where there are a number of players who I'm very, very personally close to, was the first one that really made a deep impression on me. And made me want to be part of the Violins of Hope project. The cellist in the Cleveland Orchestra, the principal cellist in the Cleveland Orchestra, Mark Kossower, is one of the laureates of the Klein competition, this big competition we run in San Francisco. And this helped promote his career. And he talked to me about the experience of
he was extremely enthusiastic with the project, yes.
And then you've had Nashville, and what other places in the U.S. have had the large-scale projects?
Berlin, in Germany, Phoenix, Scottsdale, Phoenix, Arizona, Nashville, Knoxville,
and of course,
all the other people are going to be mad at me that I didn't.
Right. But I wanted to mention that the project in the Bay Area centered around the Cole Mansion was a large-scale project with many, many concerts, all of which, and exhibitions and lectures and many, many in-school presentations. These Violins of Hope projects are comprehensive. They operate on many levels, both as exhibits of the instruments in museums and libraries, and lectures about the history of the project and the instruments. Many, many concerts. Commissioned works to be played on these instruments. There was a wonderful one of those that took place at Cole Mansion. All of that happened in the San Francisco Bay Area project under the supervision of Patricia and the Cole Mansion staff, except the very last one. It was going to be our concert. So we look forward to capping off the whole Bay Area project with that. And I also want to point out that these concerts tend to have a wide range of music, some of which is strictly classical music, some of which contains cross sections of Jewish and Klezmer music or religious Jewish music with classical music. And we're going to ask Niv to play one of the great pieces in that tradition by Ernest Bloch, his Nigun from the Baal Shem Suite. And I want to also point out, because we have a Bay Area connection here, that Ernest Bloch is one of the great landmarks of Bay Area music. He was one of the founders of the San Francisco Conservatory. He's taught at UC Berkeley for many, many years, lived in Oregon and commuted back and forth between Oregon and Berkeley. And his music has a wonderful way of embodying in this case, sort of improvisatory version of a nigun, an unspoken, wordless melody. What would you like to tell us about Bloch's nigun, Niv?
This is personally one of my favorite pieces. This is actually one of the pieces on the album, and one of the first pieces I played on this particular instrument. Bloch, with everything that you said, he also was one of the key people to create the new Jewish sound. There was a movement to create what Jewish sound would sound like. And he was a key player in that. And you can really hear that in his playing in this piece. And you hear it throughout the world now, a similar style of music.
One of the pieces that we were going to be playing with the Peninsula Symphony was a very large scale or very large orchestra piece called Three Jewish Poems by Bloch, which does not get performed all that often. And so having missed the opportunity to play that and looking forward to the opportunity to play it again in the next spring, we'd like to hear now the Nigun from the Baal Shem Suite by Ernest Bloch, played by Niv Ashkenazi. Very beautiful. Thank you, Neve. That's you play that with such a wonderful sense of the emotion, of the cantorial style, of the beauty of that quasi-improvised, gorgeous, gorgeous melody. And to bring so much passion, so much heart to that music, and to hear it played on that extraordinary violin that brings us in contact with the history of the period, the history of the 20th century in Jewish music, and the story of the Holocaust. Instruments that Amnon and Avshi Weinstein brought back to the world. It connects all of us in such a powerful way. So I want to thank you, Avshi, for being the focal point for all of the Violins of Hope, uplifting, inspiring, historically so important to all of us. The survivors of the Holocaust are getting fewer and fewer, but these instruments are survivors of the Holocaust. And as the Holocaust fades from living memory, these instruments will be there. And they are meant to be played, as they were so beautifully by Neve. So thank you both. Any concluding words you want to say?
I hope to see you in end of April.
Absolutely.
In person.
We look forward to seeing each other, all three of us together sometime very soon as possible, and make these musical experiences come alive again. Thank you, Neve Ashkenazi. Thanks, by the way, to our sponsors of this program for enabling us to bring this to our audience. Thanks to Neve Ashkenazi, thanks to Avshalom Weinstein. We'll see you at the next program, and thank you all for watching and listening to this beautiful music today. So long.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.